Welcome everyone to day 3 of Blackbaud Developers Conference. We are in the Skills Lab for embedding a Power App to launch a workflow in Razor's Edge NXT. Today's session will be facilitated by Ben Lambert, and you may be wondering, who is Ben Lambert? He is like all things developers. So he's going to share some great information with you all. So now I'll turn things over to Ben.
Thank you so much. All right. So my name is Ben Lambert. I am a senior laureate engineer at Blackbaud. I've been at Blackbaud for 27 years now, started right out of college and have been here ever since. I love Blackbaud. I love what I do. I love building the things that I build, and I'm super passionate about helping customers. Okay, so really quickly, I just want to make sure you guys have gone through some prerequisites. This session is not so much an outcome focused session, but more of a journey focused session. I want you to see the techniques. I want you to see the different tools and think about how you might apply these same tools and techniques to your organization, your interesting challenges. It may not be the most interesting thing, in your case to build, send participant emails, custom tile, but maybe you've got a custom tile that you have in mind for the constituent page, or maybe you have some interesting workflows that you need to launch from the account page in FE. So really, again, these are really more tips and techniques to kind of get your juices flowing creatively about how you might apply these to your own scenario. So feel free to follow along, click along with me, actually build the same thing. But if you find it's not really working for you and you really just want to kind of sit back and relax, that's totally fine as well. So a couple of prerequisites. Let's make sure that you've created a Sky developer account and that you've registered a Sky application. And let's make sure that we've got that Sky application connected to your Blackbaud environment. And that's a step that requires an administrator, which may be you, which may not be you. The administrator needs to go in and click a few buttons, manually connect your application to your Blackbaud environment. But anyway, so let's make sure your app is connected to your Blackbaud environment. Let's make sure that you have access to an instance of Razor's Edge that you can log into and visit the event page, and make sure that you have a test event configured with yourself added as a participant so that you can receive the emails that we're going to send through the flow that we build today. And then lastly, let's make sure you have access to Power Apps and Power Automate websites. What we're going to be building is a custom tile for the event record page. And the custom tile will be a Sky add-in, and it will host what's called a Power App. And when the Power App send button is clicked, we're going to do some interesting work in a Power Automate flow. So we're going to use Power Apps to build a front-end user experience with labels and text boxes and buttons. And we're going to use a Power Automate workflow to perform some interesting business logic when the button is clicked. So really 3 moving pieces that we're going to talk about: a Sky add-in, a Power App, and a Power Automate workflow. And again, the goal of this really is to show you how to wire these things up so that they work together. You can build them independently in any particular order that you might want. And in fact, this kind of technique and the way I go about doing this is really a useful sort of incremental fashion. So we're going to start small, and then we're going to polish a little bit later on. So 3 independent moving pieces: an add-in, a Power App, and a Power Automate workflow. And you can build them independently. I'm going to start with the Power App in this case. But again, this is an emphasis on technique more than necessarily the end result. So the first piece that I want to build, again, we're going to build 3 pieces today. We're going to build a Sky add-in, a Power App, and a Power Automate workflow. I'm going to start with the Power App. So let's jump over to our Power Apps website, and we're going to create a new Power App. Now, there are a number of different ways that you can create a Power App. From the home page, there are a couple of quick link buttons here. Make your own app that you can create. You can go to the apps page and click a plus button to create. You can click the create button from the left-hand side here. Several different ways you can do that. I'm just going to click Canvas app from blank from the home page. And let's call this app Conference Demo Power App. I spent a lot of time creatively thinking about what to name this. So there you go, Conference Demo Power App. And we're going to pick tablet. thinking ahead, knowing what we're going to build, we hope, we aspire for this to be a tile on the constituent page, and a tile is more of a landscape orientation. So that's going to be a better choice than phone, which is a little bit more of a rectangular vertical orientation. Both will work fine. We're just going to get a better end result if we start with the tablet. And this is a setting that you can change later on, by the way, but right now we're going to pick tablet. And let's go and click create. And what's going to happen is Power Apps is going to open another tab and navigate you to the design experience for your brand new shiny Power App. And we'll give that a second to load up here. Okay, so here we are in the Power Apps design experience, and this is kind of a canonical orientation of a WYSIWYG designer. You've got your design surface here in the middle. This is the user interface element that people are going to see when they hit your Power App. You've got a properties window over on the right-hand side. When you select an item in the designer, you can set properties for it. Over on the left-hand side, you've got some navigation and some quick links to help facilitate getting stuff onto the design surface. If you're familiar with Excel, there's a little bit of a ribbon kind of experience up at the top here where you'll see a function bar. You can highlight elements in the design surface and set static text, or you can set expressions here. And so we're going to build a first Power App, and we're going to spend 0 time on the polish. We're not going to spend any time making it pretty. We're just going to get something up and running quickly to see how it works, and then we'll come back later on. And so again, this is that iterative process that I find very helpful when you're working with new tools or when you're working with these kinds of tools. It's very it's a good practice to just build incrementally, start small, introduce a new piece, introduce a new piece, introduce a new piece. My dad has a saying. My dad is like 75. He has a saying for everything. Don't eat the elephant all at once. Eat it a little piece at a time. And so that's what we're going to try and do. We're going to eat little pieces at a time and bring in new moving pieces, in incremental stages. So here we go. We're in our Power App, and the first thing we're going to do is let's add a label to this design surface. Now we're going to do that by clicking on the plus button over here. And this will show you the different components that you can pop onto the design surface. And Microsoft has organized these components from a variety of categories, including a popular category. All of the items in popular generally will show up somewhere else in the list of categorized components that you can reference. But right from popular, we're just going to click on, no need to drag, just click on text label, and you'll see a text label show up on the design surface. Now you can actually click and drag this guy around. We're going to put this, you don't have to, and I'm just going to put this up in the upper left-hand corner. And I'm going to expand it or drag it and increase the size just a little bit so we have a little more real estate to work with. And I'm going to go over onto the left-hand side and change the value of the text property from the word text to something. Now, just change the text to be hello world, and congratulations, you've just built your first Power App. That's all there is to it. Now, what can you do with this? Now, the Power App, it's not that useful at this point, just has a label on it. What can you do with it? Well, you can hit F5 to preview it, or you can click the play button in the upper right, and that will just give you a little preview of your Power App. But at this point, that's about all you can do with it until you save it. Once you save it, this Power App will actually be something you can access from the Power Apps mobile mobile app. So you can go onto your Android or Apple phone, the Microsoft phone, probably if you're one of those people who has a Microsoft phone. No, not judging at all. But you can go download the Power Apps mobile app, and this app will then show up. You can think of the Power Apps mobile app as a little bit of a container for interesting Power Apps that you or your colleagues build. So the idea is you can build using the browser interface and drag and drop stuff on the design surface, and you've got an interesting Power App, and then it will show up in the Power Apps mobile app, and you didn't have to build and deploy a native mobile app and deploy it to the App Store and all that kind of stuff. So the Power App mobile app is a container for the interesting Power Apps that you can build. So let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to click on the File menu, and then I'm going to click on make sure the cloud is selected. We want to save this Power App to the cloud, wherever that is, who knows. And the name is already popped in here, Conference Demo Power App. That's good enough for me, and I'll hit Save. And there we go. We've just saved our first Power App. So now if you were to go to your mobile app, you would see this thing show up. But again, not terribly useful at this point. So the first thing I want to do is, so of the three pieces we're going to create, we've created one already. There's our Power App. We're done with that step. We'll come back to it and make it more interesting, but primarily, or for all intents and purposes, we're kind of done with that step right now. But I want to register this Power App and build that second component in our list of three as a Sky add-in. And to do that, I'm going to need some information about the Power App that we just created. So if you click on See All Versions, and then click on Details. All right, so what I'm hoping that you'll be able to get to is the details page for your Power App that you've built, which shows you're the owner, here's when it was created, here's when it was modified, and then here's some interesting identifiers and links for your Power App. So as I mentioned, now that you've saved it, this Power App is accessible from the Power Apps mobile app, but it's also accessible from the web link. So this link here you can click on and it will actually launch the player for your Power App. This is not the previewer, although it looks very similar. This is the actual runtime player, the browser-based player for your Power App. So you can actually access it here just through that link that you clicked on. And so that's interesting. But really what I want you to grab here is I want you to note here is the ID of your Power App, and I'm going to hit Control F so you can see other occurrences of this string on the page. You can see that that web link includes the ID of your Power App, and it also includes a parameter called your tenant ID. This has nothing to do with Blackbaud, of course. This is your Power App tenant ID. This is actually an optional value, and Microsoft says you can omit the tenant ID if you want to allow guest access to your Power App. In this case, Razor's Edge obviously isn't a guest-oriented application. You have to log in, so a tenant ID is going to be required. But I'm actually going to grab this URL because I want to get these two identifiers. I'm going to use them in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this entire URL, and I'm just going to paste it into Notepad so I can come back to it in just a moment. So really two identifiers, one's the app ID, one's the tenant ID. I'm just grabbing the string on the screen so I can make use of those parameters. And what we're going to do now is, and again, we've created our Power App, so we're done with that step. We're going to come over to our Sky application, and a Sky application here, I can click on the add-ins tile. I can click the add button to create a new add-in definition associated with my Sky application. So your Sky application is just a container that represents the thing you as a developer are kind of building and contributing. It might make API calls, it might not. It might have add-ins, it might not. But this is the container that's really the unit of work, and this is it's the OAuth client if you're familiar with OAuth, and it's the thing that will show up in the Blackbaud marketplace if you want to publish this to the marketplace, and it's the thing that your administrator will enable manually through the sideloading process. So you can think of the conference demo Sky application as just your container, and inside this container you can add one or more Sky add-in definitions, and I'm going to create a Sky add-in definition with this application. And when you're creating an add-in definition, there's three values that you have to supply. The first here is a just an informational string for your add-in. This is just informational. It's not going to show up right now to any other users. This is just to help you disambiguate one app from another, or one add-in from another add-in if you have multiple add-ins with your Sky application. So I'm going to name this Conference Demo Tile Add-in. Arbitrary value I'm going to supply here. And then the next piece of information I have to provide is an extension point. Now, an extension point, right now this is just a big long drop down. You may not see as many items as I do. That's okay. We have some internal that we're working on. An extension point is an area of the Blackbaud product where we have designated it appropriate to support extensibility. That's just a named location in the product. It could be the constituent page tile dashboard, the vendor page tile dashboard, the action page action button, the home page tile. It's just a named location within the Blackbaud UI where Blackbaud has deemed it appropriate and has said we will support extensibility at this location. So in the Sky Developer Portal, in the add-ins documentation, there's a concepts area, and inside concepts you'll find extension points. This is the documentation for all the extension points that have been defined so far. And you can click on events over on the left-hand side and you'll see the content that we have for the extension points that are categorized under events. And the reason I mention this is because this is where we've explicitly documented something called the context. So each extension point has a context. And part of the magic of the Sky add-ins framework is that we have this mechanism to wire up the context of the current record that you're looking at to your add-in. So if you're looking at a constituent, we'll give you the constituent ID. If you're looking at an event, we'll give you an event ID, and so on and so on. In this case, the event tile dashboard is the extension point that we're interested in because we're building a tile for the event page. And according to the documentation, the context object made available at runtime for add-ins to the event tile dashboard will contain a single property called record ID, and this will be the system record ID of the current event. So we're going to make use of that in just a moment. So right now, when we're creating an add-in, we're going to pick the event tile dashboard extension point. And then the third piece of information is, well, at runtime, an iframe is going to be wired up, and the iframe is going to be wired up in the Blackbaud UI, and it's going to contain the URL that you provide here. So we have to tell the Blackbaud system where is your add-in located. And prior to the Power App Host SPA, this is the step that required a developer. You got to paste in a URL. What's the URL? Well, you've got to go build and deploy a website. It'd be nice if you didn't have to do that step. And so that's what the Power App Host SPA will do for you. So the Power App Host SPA documentation is located here. Within the Sky Developer Portal, there's a link to the Power Platform. Under Power Apps, you'll find Power Apps add-ins, and this is the documentation for how to use the Power App Host SPA. The Power App Host SPA is located at this base URL. So I'm going to copy this value. It's app.blackbaud.com/add-in Power App Host. I'll paste this into the chat. That's the host URL. And according to the documentation here, the way you're going to phrase the URL that we have to paste in when creating your add-in definition is you use the Power App Host SPA, the Power App type, and then you paste in the ID of your Power App. So let's go over and do that. So I'll paste in the base URL, app.blackbaud.com/add-in Power App Host, and this is a tile. So we're going to paste in the word tile, and we need to provide app ID and tenant ID. This is the general format of the URL that you're going to paste in. And the values that you're going to place into the placeholders in this value are going to come from the Power App website. So if you remember, we grabbed this web link that had both of the IDs that we need, and I pasted that into a notepad. So I'm going to grab the app ID, which was this first value, and I'll paste that into the placeholder. And then we're going to grab the tenant ID, Power App tenant ID, and now we're going to come back over here and just paste that into the second placeholder. So you guys with me so far? All we've done is we are defining an add-in for the event tile dashboard, and the add-in makes use of the add-in Power App Host SPA. We're using a tile, and we've pasted in the two identifiers, our Power App ID and our Power App tenant ID. So I'm going to save this. And now if I go back to the event record page and we hit F5, we should see a new tile show up here. What? Look at that. There it is. Now this is a native tile. It looks and feels and smells just like any of the tiles that Blackbaud has created out of the box. You can collapse it, you can expand it, you can move it around. It will, and the state and location will be persisted. So the next time you come back to the page, it will look just like this. So I want to pause here for a minute and just sort of bask and reflect on how cool it is of what we just did. And maybe I think it's a little cooler than you guys, and that's okay. I'm a little bit of a nerd like that. What did we do? We just created a Power App using a fairly simple drag and drop WYSIWYG designer experience. And then we referenced that Power App when we created an add-in definition with our Sky application for a particular location within the Blackbaud UI. And then we go to that location in the Blackbaud UI, and all of a sudden we see something brand new showing up. Now, it doesn't look amazing at this point, but functionally, we just did it. We built two of the three pieces. We've got a Power App and we've got a Sky add-in that references it. And we didn't write any code. So it's really, really pretty cool. And hopefully you can start to see, hey, this is going to be pretty powerful. Now I can go back into my Power App and begin incrementally polishing and adding new stuff. And it's going to light up here within, in this case, Razor's Edge Event Record Detail page. So a couple things to check. Make sure that the URL that you typed in is correctly cased. I believe there is some case sensitivity. Make sure it's app ID with a capitalized app. Make sure it's tenant ID with a capitalized I. Make sure that the base URL is correct. https app.blackbaud.com/addin power app host. Make sure that the extension point is the event tile dashboard. You may have accidentally picked the event page action extension point. So make sure that is correct. Make sure that you have saved the Power App, which you would have had to do to be able to get the IDs needed for the URL. And let's see, what's something else to check? Make sure that your Sky application is connected in your Blackbaud instance. Now you can actually see that as the developer of an application. You can see that from within the developer portal. There's a View Environments button. Click on that View Environments button, and this will show you the environments in which your application has been connected. Now, you as the developer can't connect it to a particular environment. That's something that the administrator for that environment has to perform. But this step, if you don't see your environment listed here, this would indicate why it's not showing up. This add-in will show up for any environment in which the containing Sky application has been connected. So if you connect it to your test instance or your test environment, it'll show up only when you log into Razor's Edge in your test environment. It's also important to note it will show up for all users. But again, those users right now will just see sort of a placeholder Power App because they won't have access to the Power App that you just created. So here we are on the event record page, and we see our Power App showing up. But the Power App doesn't look amazing. It's kind of shrunk. And the text is really kind of small to read. But we do have these two pieces wired up. We've got our Power App wired up. It's registered as a Sky add-in. It's showing up on the event record detail page. And we can actually go back to the Power App now and make a change. And let's see that change reflected here. We'll go back to the design surface and let's make a change. So I'm going to update this label to say instead of Hello World, let's put Hello World 2 here, just so we'll know we have something to show up. And the other thing I want to do, as long as I'm in here, is I'm going to try and make the scaling work a little bit better. So I'm going to go into the File menu within the Power Apps website, and I'm going to click on Settings, and Power Apps will show a little modal dialog with some settings for this Power App, and I'm going to click on the Display Vertical tab, and there's a toggle just underneath under the Scale to Fit area. I'm going to turn that off. So I'm going to turn off Scale to Fit, and I've just changed the text of my label. And those are the only two changes that I've made so far. I'm going to close the modal dialog, and I'm going to save this Power App. So I'm just going to click on the File menu. Power Apps gives me an opportunity to specify a note about the change I'm making. So let's just say turn off Scale to Fit and tweaked the label. And I'll save this. So I'm saving my Power App again. And if I go back to the event page and I hit F5 to refresh the entire page, what am I going to see? Well, I'm going to see exactly what I saw before. There's no change yet. And if I hit F5 a dozen times, I'm not going to see anything new. And that's because Power Apps has the concept of multiple versions, only one of which is the live version at any given time. So you can actually go into your Power App, have a live version running, build out new functionality, test and debug it before you actually make it live. And so that's what we're seeing here. If you go back into your Power App on the publish page, on the save page, you'll be able to see all versions. And you'll be able to see that there is version 1 is the live, and version 2 represents the edits that we just made, and that one is not live. And this page sometimes takes a while to load, so we'll just wait. Okay, so there we go. Here's version 1 and version 2. You can see version 1 is the live version. Version 2 is not yet published and made live. So let's do that. Let's click on the ellipses here and we'll click publish this version. And we'll just confirm publish this version. And now the UI will update and we can see that version 2 is the live version. I'm going to close this tab because going forward, I'll just do this work from the other tab. And so now if we go back to our record event record page and we hit F5, this may take 1 or 2 refreshes. Power Apps does some caching itself, and that's just something that's a little bit of a quirk you kind of have to work around. So I'm going to refresh a couple of times and eventually we should see. There we go. Okay, so here is our updated Power App. You can see that the Hello World label is now Hello World 2, and the scaling is a little bit better, and it looks a little bit better. So now you can kind of see this process of make a change to your Power App, save, publish, refresh. That's a series of steps that we're going to go through a number of times in this demo. So now you can kind of see you can iteratively make changes to your Power App and see those changes light up in the system. Okay, so we talked about versions, we talked about saving and publishing and refreshing. So at this point, we've created a basic Power App and we've wired it up to a Sky add-in. It shows on the event page, and we've seen how to iteratively build up that Power App. But the Power App doesn't do anything useful at this point, although I must say it's beautiful. Frankly, it's just amazing. Now, what we need to happen is we need the Power App to know the context of the current record that we're looking at. As part of the magic of the Sky add-ins framework is that you can build and inject some custom UI and have that custom UI know something about the current record, whether it's a constituent or in this case an event. So I'm currently sitting on event page ID 24. That is the system record ID of the quarantine dinner party event, which I should have changed my date. But this is ID number 24. So it turns out that at every extension point in the system, Blackbaud has effectively defined a contract with add-ins at that extension point. And that contract essentially says the host application is going to provide a context object to you, and here's the properties of that context object. For the event tile dashboard, like we saw earlier, the context object is going to contain the record ID. And if you look at the Power App host SPA documentation, you can jump over to the access context values at runtime link on the right, and you'll see that we make those context values available to your Power App, and they're accessible within Power Apps through the param function. So in this case, the context record ID is available within your Power App using an expression that involves the param function where you specify the context underscore record ID. And by the way, this is case sensitive, uppercase I, lowercase d. So we make available all the context values that are available, defined by the extension point, available to the Power App using a convention context underscore property name. In this case, we want the record ID property name, so we're going to use this function. So let's go back over to the Power App, and I'm going to add another label to the form. So we'll click text label, and we'll orient this label somewhere on the page. And now I could set, just like we did with the Hello World label, I could set this to a static value. I could set the text property of this to a static value, but in this case, I actually want it to be a function. I want to use an expression to describe the text that I want to show up here, and that is done through the function bar. So I could do something like this. We'll specify a string, the string literal event ID with a colon, and I'll use the ampersand operator to do string concatenation, and now we're going to use the param function and we're going to reference the context record ID parameter. So here I've just defined an expression that when resolved will be the text property of this label on the screen. And as long as I'm here, let me go ahead and fix up the Hello World label to be something a little bit more indicative of what we ultimately are trying to build. This Power App will send an email to all participants for the event. And we have another label here that is the event ID, and we're going to show how to display the current event record ID, system record ID. Now, this is one way of writing that expression. Power Apps has a number of syntaxes that you can use. I think this one is pretty easy, so we'll stick with it, but just to show you, there's a concatenate function that itself accepts an array of comma-separated string values. and this will produce the same result as the function that we wrote before. But I think this one's pretty easy, so we'll stick with that. Okay, so again, all we've done at this point is we've tweaked the caption for our label, we've added another label, and we set the text property to an expression that concatenates two strings. Let's add a space here just to make sure it's pretty. And now let's go save this Power App, and let's say show context. Let's just say show the event ID here. We'll save the Power App, and we'll go through that sequence of save, publish, and refresh. And let's come over here to our event page. We're going to hit F5 until we see our updated Power App. And there we go. Okay, so this demonstrates that the context from the host application, the host Blackbaud application, which in this case is the event record detail page, where the context as defined by the extension point, just the record ID property, that context, which is the ID of the event, is flowing from the host app to the Power App, and we can show that value in the UI. Now that the Power App is wired up to our current event, we can do a lot more interesting things to it. Within Power Apps itself, there are rich things that you can do just natively within Power Apps. You can leverage connectors within Power Apps. You can have rich UI built out here, very complicated UI. You can leverage connectors. You can drag Power BI charts. There's a lot of stuff you can do here. One of the things you can do is drive Power Automate, and I find that a useful thing to demonstrate, but just know that's not a requirement. You can actually leverage other interesting connectors right from within Power Apps itself. But at this point, we've built really two pieces. We've built our Power App. We've incrementally built it up over time a little bit. We've built a Sky add-in that references that, and now we've made the Sky add-in context available to the Power App. So we're making good progress, but there's a lot of things that you can do at this point. So let's go back into the Power App and kind of flesh out that user interface in a little bit more detail. So here we are in the Power App, and I'm going to pop a few more labels on here. So I'll add a label, drag it where I want it, and let's give it the text of subject. And now I'm going to drag on a text input, which is just a text box. We'll put this here and we'll size it about like that. And I'm going to clear the default text. I don't want any default text, but I do want some hint text. Please enter the subject. I'll specify that property. And let's give this text box a more indicative name than the default name given by Power Apps, text input 1. Text input 1 would work fine. It's just not very indicative of what this is. So I'm going to call this text subject. So now I have my text subject. We're going to add another text label and give that the text of body. I left my colon off of the subject, so let's go add that, or my semicolon. No, my colon. And let's add a different control type. Now I could add another text input here for the body, but I actually want the ability for the user to provide some rich text. And so I can't use a text input. I have to use a different control, and that control is located under the input category in Power Apps. If you scroll down a bit, you'll find Rich Text Editor. So if you click on Rich Text Editor, now you'll see a rich text box showing up, and you can drag it wherever you'd like in the screen. So here we go. We have two labels. We got text boxes and rich text boxes. Let's clear that default rich text. We don't want that, just to get rid of that guy. And let's give the rich text a little bit better name than the default. So I'll use RTB body. Oops, let's fix that because I'm obsessive about things. Okay, and let's drag a button on here. You can find a button from within the input section, but it's also under popular. And for this button text, we're going to have it say something other than button. Let's make this say send, and we'll give this a better name, BTN send. Let's put an icon on here as well, just to illustrate how you can do that. Under popular, there is an add icon item. So if we click on that, you'll see an icon appear on the design surface. going to drag it down here, and I don't want the plus icon. I actually want the send icon. So I'll type in send in the search box over in the properties window, and I'll pick the little paper airplane. But blue on blue isn't a great color contrast choice. So let's pick white, and I'll drag that onto the button and maybe size it a little bit smaller so it shows up nicely there. Okay. So you guys with me so far? Got a couple extra controls. We're just kind of fleshing out the UI in our Power App at this point. But we haven't done anything interesting when the button is clicked. We'll get to that next. All we're doing at this point is trying to get our UI in a state that looks good and kind of reflects what we're ultimately trying to build. So now that we have this built, I'm going to go through the same mechanics of save, publish, and refresh. So let's say, let's call this finishing the UX, and we'll save, and I'll publish that. And let's go back to the event page and refresh the page until we see our updated Power App. Sometimes this happens first time, sometimes you got to refresh a few times. There we go. And so now we've got a Power App wired up. The user can type in some interesting subject. You can type in some interesting rich text here, and you can make it bold and italics, and that's exactly what we want. And when you click the button, it doesn't do anything yet, but our UI is looking pretty good at this point. So let's go back and execute the last of the moving pieces that we are set to build. So we've done 2 of the 3, and the last of the moving pieces is our Power Automate workflow. And this is going to be the piece that performs the interesting business logic that in this scenario just goes and looks up the registered participants for the event and sends them an email. There's a couple of ways to do this particular step. You could start from within the Power Automate website. As you see here, there's a number of ways you can create a flow. You can do it from the home page. You can do it from the Create button. You can do it from the Create button on the My Flows list. But I'll show you a number of, I'll show you a little bit better way. In this case, because we're trying to wire up a Power App and a Power Automate workflow, I'll show you a better way to wire that up. So if we go back into our Power App, go back into the design surface. Here's a little bit more convenient way to wire up a Power Automate trigger to a button in Power Apps. And again, you could do this from Power Automate website, but I'll show you how to do it from this direction. Click on the button, and under the menu, you're going to see an action item. You'll see an action menu. When you click on action menu, you're going to see Power Automate. And when you click on Power Automate, a little window will open. And Power Apps is now interrogating Power Automate to say, show me any of the Power Automate workflows in this environment that are to be triggered by a Power App button. So those are the only Power Apps, Power Automate workflows that are going to show up here. And we don't see in this case, these are a few interesting workflows that I built for other scenarios, but I don't see what I'm looking for here. I haven't built it yet. So we're going to create a new flow right from this step. So when you click Create a New Flow, a new tab is going to open up, and it's going to take you into the Power Automate website onto the templates page, pre-filtered to the Power Apps button template. So again, you could do this right from within Power Automate, but this is just a little bit easier way. We're going to pick the Power Apps button template, and this is going to give us a basic Power Automate workflow that will be triggered from within the Power Apps system. Okay, so here we are in Power Automate, and this Power Automate workflow is going to be triggered when something happens in Power App. And what we need to happen is, how do we get the context from the Power App, which now we know the Power App knows about our event record ID. How do I get that into my Power Automate workflow? Well, there's a way you can do that from within when you're designing the flow. So let's create a new step in the workflow. And I'm going to search for Razor's Edge, or just Razor, and you'll see the connector show up here. I'll pick the Razor's Edge connector, and now I'm going to search for participant in the list of actions, and I'm going to find the action that is list event participants. List event participants. You see this one? And so this action, which maps to the underlying Sky API, is an action that will, given an event ID, go fetch the participants for an event. Now we could introduce more exotic filtering here. Maybe you only want to send emails to event participants with a particular RSVP status or a particular invitation status or participation level, and you can express those interesting filters here. But for right now, let's just keep it very simple. Let's go get all the participants for an event. But again, which event? How do we tell this flow, I want the event from my Power App? Well, there's a way to do that from the dynamic content window. For a flow that is triggered by Power Apps, you can say, please tell me when this flow is triggered this particular value. So when you click on Ask in Power Apps, Flow will generate a token for this particular field. So in this case, we're basically saying when this flow is triggered, I'm going to expect the event ID to be provided with the trigger. So I'm just going to make an assumption that that value is provided to me. I'm going to leverage it in this flow. So specifying the event ID here, I'm going to go get participants for the incoming event. And now let's create a new step. And what do we want to do once we get the list of participants? We're going to send them an email. So I'm going to use the mail connector, and I'm going to use the send an email notification action within that connector. Who do I want to send an email to? Well, I want to send an email to each of the participants, and I want to send it to their email address. So I'm going to search in the dynamic content window. I'm going to search for email, just so I don't have to scroll a lot. And I'll pick the email from the list of participants. Now, we know that the list of participants is actually an array. So as soon as we reference an item from or a property of one of the items in that array, Power Automate is going to know, well, I'm actually dealing with a list, not a single item. So I'll automatically insert this apply to each loop for each item. Now, you can build this manually, but I find this is kind of the way naturally most people tend to think about this. So I have my list of participants and I want to do this operation. And as soon as I reference a particular item that Flow knows is an array, it's going to inject the apply to each loop for me automatically. So we're going to apply to each, which is going to walk the participants in the event that we returned. And for each participant, it's going to perform this operation. It's going to send an email. And the email is going to go to the participant's email address. And the subject and the body, well, I also want those to come from my Power App. So let's make these the same kind of parameter that we have here. Now, the way you do that, click on the subject body here, and you open the dynamic content window. If you scroll down, you can reference output from previous steps in your flow. And one of those outputs is the Power Apps, the initial trigger. You have to click the See More button. If you guys are looking at my screen here, you can see I'm hovering over this See More in the Power Apps section. If you click on See More, that's when Power Apps will show you the Ask in Power Apps option. Sorry, that's when Power Automate's dynamic content window will give you the Ask in Power Apps option. And as soon as you click that, another token will be generated. And let's do the same thing for body. So basically, I want the body and the subject to be provided upstream when the Power App triggers the Power Automate flow. So I'll click on See More again, Ask in Power Apps, and there we go. Now let's go ahead and give this flow a more interesting and highly creative name: Conference Demo Workflow. Going to win applause for my creativity and naming here. So we'll save this flow. And congratulations, you just built a flow that's actually, fairly useful if you think about it. Incoming event ID and subject and body, it's going to pull back the participants for the event, walk the participants, and send an email to each participant. And that's pretty easy to build. Like, we didn't write any code, we just drag and drop onto the design surface, and that's pretty cool. Now, I do want to mention Microsoft has recently introduced some throttles to the mail connector. And this is not going to be the best action to use if you're trying to send an email to a lot of people. This is really not intended to be a mass MailChimp style blast to 10,000 participants for an event. So this is really more appropriate if you're doing, a smaller number. And even then, there's a limit of the number of emails you can send within a particular time frame. So just be aware of that. In this case, especially for a demo, I think it's totally fine, and it demonstrates the idea. But there are better connectors within the Power Platform for sending blasts of emails. And you can certainly leverage those connectors from within your flow. But at this point, we've created a flow and we've named it Conference Demo Workflow, and it kind of does, at least what we think it does kind of what we want it to do. So I'm going to go back to Power Apps. I'm going to go back to my Power App website, and I'm going to wait just a second, not clicking on anything. And sure enough, now my Power App shows up in the list of now my Power Automate workflow shows up in the list of workflows that are triggered by Power Apps buttons, and I can just click on it to select it here. Thank God Blackbaud hasn't named our products with the Power prefix, otherwise I would be tongue-tied all day long. So just by clicking on my conference demo workflow, you can see Power Apps is adding a reference to that flow, and it's done it, and it's giving me a little bit of a message here. Hey, by the way, go complete the flow's parameters in the formula bar. So I'm going to kill this warning here, and what it's basically saying is I need to go finish telling the Power Apps engine how to trigger the flow. So it's generated an identifier here, conference demo workflow.run is a method off of it, and the IntelliSense is telling me here are the 3 values that I articulated within the Power Automate workflow that I said I needed to be upstream, provided upstream to the flow. All right, so I got to provide event ID, subject, and body. No problem. How do we get the event ID? Well, we saw it already when we created this label. We just used the param function, context underscore record ID, be aware of the casing, and great, we just satisfied one of the 3 properties needed to trigger the flow. So that's how we get the event ID, context record ID. Where's the subject going to come from? Well, that is our text subject control dot text property. So that's how we get the text from the subject text box. How do we get the text from the body? Well, that is RTB body.html text. And so here is the expression that will be executed when the button is selected. Okay, so because I want to make sure that the app has, when the app refreshes, I'm going to make a small change to this label just so I can see a change when we refresh the event page. So I'm going to capitalize all, just to emphasize that this email is going to go to all participants for the event. And so now let's rinse and repeat our 3-step process here. Let's call this trigger the flow when the button is clicked, and I'll hit save. We're going to publish. And now we'll go back to our event page, and let's refresh the page until I see my updated label. That will tell me that I know the Power Automate or the Power App has been updated. There we go. Okay. So this Power App will send an email to all participants for the event. We know the event context is wired up. This is a dinner party, so let's say, let's give this a subject of updated dinner time. So please arrive at 6 p.m. instead of 10 p.m. And let's make some stuff bold here. Bold, underline, and italics. Good enough. So now we've got some rich text that we've supplied. And the intent here, the semantics here are, hey, I as the event coordinator in Razor's Edge, looking at the event record detail page, perhaps I want to quickly communicate with those who are registered for the event. And I need to quickly tell them, hey, we've changed the event dinner time, show up at 6 instead of 10 o'clock. So let's go back really quickly because I know I'm getting low on time, and let's test this to make sure this works. I'm going to hit send. I see some buttons move or dots moving across. That's a good sign. And so in theory, this is done. If I go back to my Power Automate flow, let's go back to the run history page. This is a great feature of Power Automate that lets you troubleshoot and debug. You can actually look at the run history for your flow. And you can see, look, this was triggered about 12 seconds ago. It took 5 seconds to run. If we drill into this particular run of the flow, you can actually see all the inputs and outputs that were evaluated at every step of the way. So the flow was triggered, and the event ID was passed in correctly. Looks like the subject and body came in correctly. We called the list event participants action, and that returned an array of participant records. And then we walked the array and we sent an email. So now I saw the notification. If I come back to my email, and I'll drag this over so you can see it. There it is. So we just got an email sent to me as a participant, and the email is nicely formatted, and it indicates that it's from Microsoft Power Apps and Power Automate. I'll have to look to see if there's a way to change this so this could show up as, from your organization. But what I really hope that you take away from this is 3 different moving pieces, and I showed how to wire them up to the host application so that context flows from the host application to the add-in to the Power App to the workflow. And you can really apply these techniques and tools to very similar scenarios in your organization. And if I have a second, let's go change. I know there was a question about changing the title of this Power App tile. So if I go back to my Sky application and I'm going to edit my add-in definition, I'm going to append another query parameter. Title equals send participant email. Now this is a URL, so it's not going to like having spaces in there. I need to actually URL encode those spaces, and a space is %20, so I'm just going to type that in manually, %20. So now this is going to change the title. Let me save this, and I'll refresh the event page, and we should see an updated tile caption. Suspense is killing me. Pausing for drama. There we go. Send participants email. Now, just to mention it, I won't have time to show it, unfortunately, but if I change this from a tile to a button, if I change this word to button and I append a particular button action, I could show this as a flyout on the event page. So a new button will show up here, and when I click the button, a flyout will show. Or when I click the button, a modal will show, and that can be your opportunity to really maximize your screen real estate. So a lot of cool options, and all of that is documented and demonstrated here under the Power Apps Host SPA documentation. So here you can see a button add-in showing a flyout, and here you can see a button add-in launching a modal dialog. So a lot of different options for how you can present this Power App content, and it's all done through strict configuration. We're not actually writing any code. So with that said, so here are a couple of interesting links. If you only remember one, developer.blackbaud.com, that's your entry point. All of these other links are available from the Sky Developer Portal. Think about how you can apply these techniques and tools to interesting scenarios in your world, and I would love nothing more than to see examples of that.
Thank you so much for your time, Ben, and the information you shared. Thank you to our participants. Again, this information will be available in the showcase environment. Is that correct, Ben?
Yes, great question. Great question. There's a link to the showcase out in the developer portal. There are 2 showcases. There's a Sky application showcase, and then there's a community showcase for interesting stuff built by Blackbaud and by customers like yourselves, and we accept contributions. So here's a place to go where you can look at interesting showcase items, interesting flows and Power Apps that other customers have.
Awesome. Thank you again. You all have a good remainder of the day as the conference comes to an end. And as Ben stated, if you're not already part of community, please, please, please do join, because we have multiple customers who are contributing flows in that environment. All right. You all take care. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, guys. Take care.